I don't think my last live stream went through. That makes me sad. Okay. Let's see what the fuck I got in the mail. Okay, wait. K-O-S-E E-R-O-U S-S-E A-U. What is this? Okay, whoa. What are you talking about, dude? Obituaries. You're okay. I am having a hard time. Okay. Love you, bye. Oh my god. What? Okay. Well, that's not helpful. Yeah. Okay, wait. What? This kind of fucked up. What is happening? No. Someone's currently hacking me. That sucks. Fuck. Eh. 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 Full scan. Yeah, I got that. What's going on? Uh, okay. Let's just go ahead and. Okay. Mm. Oh wait, no. Mm. 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 I'll fucking lose it. Are you serious? Mm. I'm gonna freak out. Okay. Copy. Copy. Wow. You have to be just the biggest piece of crap. Mm. Mm. Gotta be fucking kidding. I accidentally grabbed this thinking it was my highway bill. What the actual shit is this?
Holy fuck! Ow! You suck. Yep. Hey, cool. What a bitch. All that. God, I hate fucking being a female.
Oh my god, I'm gonna fucking lose my shit. Slap.
Ooh. Angry panda.
Hmm. Fucker.
Or medications like it do to the human body. This is a very common medication that I'm sure many of you have probably used for things like pain, inflammation, a fever, or maybe even something like period or menstrual cramps. But could this medication cause any harm or potential side effects? Maybe you've heard it could affect the liver, the stomach, or other organs throughout the human body. So in this video, we're going to take a look at those organs by utilizing the bodies behind me, and of course talk about how this medication works on you. So let's do this. So at some point, we're going to need to take this and get it into the various digestive system structures so that eventually the medication can get absorbed into the body so that it can take its effect. But first, what is ibuprofen? Ibuprofen, commonly known as some other brand names like Advil or Motrin, is classified as a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, or an NSAID. Now, there are some steroidal anti-inflammatories. Maybe you've heard of things like prednisone or dexamethasone, but those steroidal anti-inflammatories work a little differently, and so we'll save those for a different video and focus on these non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen. Now, ibuprofen has some pretty common uses.
Talk about
It's
fucking
commonly
steroids right
used
now.
as an analgesic, which is a pain reliever, an antipyretic, which is a fever reducer, and obviously as an anti-inflammatory. Now, is ibuprofen the only NSAID out there? Absolutely not. Some of you have probably used some others or heard of them. Things like Aleve, also known as naproxen. Some of my patients have also used a topical one called Voltaren gel or diclofenac gel. That's kind of this generic versus brand name thing. And there are a variety of prescription strength NSAIDs. And for the most part, they all have this similar mechanism of action, or in other words, how they work in the body. And so we'll focus on ibuprofen as kind of our baseline NSAID because it's one of the most commonly used. So let's finally get this thing into the body to figure out how it works. So I've got my 200 milligram tablet of ibuprofen, which you probably can't see very well. So I'll put it in my tweezers here and we'll trace it into the body. Here's a sagittal cut of a head. So essentially like so. And most of us first put the pill in the mouth or the oral cavity here. Now, we often say the oral cavity or the mouth is where digestion begins. But this pill isn't going to spend a lot of time there. We pop it in there, put some water in and swallow it quickly down into the pharynx here. And then to the next part of the tube would be the esophagus here. The esophagus is the food tube or posterior to the windpipe or the trachea here. And that tablet would then move down the esophagus. And I can show you on an anterior or a front view of the esophagus on this dissection, moving down into the stomach here. Now, many of you have probably heard that ibuprofen can be harmful to the stomach, and there's definitely truth to that. But first, let's get it absorbed into the body and figure out what it's supposed to do, and then we can talk about its potential side effects. So in the stomach, it's going to start mixing with the gastric juices. Those gastric juices essentially include things like the stomach acid, digestive enzymes, and even some of the stomach mucus. Now, that's where the pill or the tablet's actually going to start to dissolve, and its active ingredients are going to be released or to a point where they can start to be absorbed. Now, some of it can get absorbed into the stomach or through the bloodstream, through that mucosal lining that we'll show you later in the video. But the majority of it's still going to pass into the small intestine, and this is where the majority of the medication will actually be absorbed. The small intestine has tons and tons of blood vessels to absorb nutrients, or in this case, a medication. And this whole timeline of where absorption can start to take place is about 30 to 60 minutes, depending on things like the contents of the stomach. But now that we're in the bloodstream, we essentially can think or say that the medication is going to be distributed to potentially everywhere. And now we can talk about how it takes its effect. So ibuprofen works by inhibiting certain enzymes called cyclooxygenase 1 and cyclooxygenase 2, or COX-1 and COX-2. But what in the world does that mean? Well, these enzymes, COX-1 and COX-2, normally get involved in synthesizing other substances called prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are extremely important to this discussion because these prostaglandins are involved in multiple physiological processes throughout the body. Some of these include things like inflammation. Another is they're involved in pain and essentially stimulating certain pain receptors. You find a lot of prostaglandins in areas of infection and tissue damage. They're also involved with interacting with this structure in the central core of the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus does a lot of things, but one of the things it gets involved in with is body temperature and even the fever response. We also see prostaglandins influencing uterine contractions, say like during menstrual cramping. It can cause that smooth muscle in the uterus to contract. Other things are influencing blood flow into these cool little organs that we call the kidney. You can see this artery right here, blood would go in, but it really influences some of these microscopic vessels that you'd find on the cortex or the outer portion of the kidney here. And the last thing that I want to mention that the prostaglandins get involved in, if I take this other dissection of the stomach, is the prostaglandins also get involved in aiding in the mucosal lining of the stomach, or the inside lining of the stomach here, producing mucus, and also helps to regulate stomach acid. So I want you to kind of think about that huge list that we just created of all the things that the prostaglandins are involved in. And if I can take a medication like ibuprofen that inhibits COX-1 and COX-2, these enzymes that produce prostaglandins, I'm going to lower the number of prostaglandins by stomach acid. So I want you to kind of think about that huge list that we just created of all the things that the prostaglandins are involved in. And if I can take a medication like ibuprofen that inhibits COX-1 and COX-2, these enzymes that produce prostaglandins, I'm going to lower the number of prostaglandins that are circulating throughout the body. And so therefore I could help potentially reduce inflammation, help reduce pain, help reduce the fever, and even help reduce like menstrual cramping. And a lot of you have probably used these medications with some level of success with varying degrees, depending on the pain levels and what was actually going on with your body. But what about the potential side effects? Let's discuss those by going to another cadaver. So let's talk about some of the potential side effects of ibuprofen. Whenever we take a medication, we kind of have to do this pros versus cons, the pros of the therapeutic benefits of the medication versus the cons or those side effects of the medication. So with ibuprofen, could it affect the liver, the stomach, or other organs throughout the human body? Well, let's start with the liver. If you take a look at this section here, I've got the diaphragm in my hands here, and if I reflect this diaphragm or this muscle back or upwards, you can see this huge organ that we call the liver. The liver is the second largest organ in the human body, second to the skin, and it's located in the right upper quadrant of the abdomen. Now, the liver does a ton of amazing things for the human body, one of which is to metabolize a lot of different drugs or medications. And what do we mean by metabolize drugs and medications? Well, let's think about the ibuprofen circulating throughout the bloodstream. Eventually, that ibuprofen is going to pass through the liver. And when it passes through the liver contains certain enzymes that are going to actually convert the ibuprofen into more of an inactivated form and what they would refer to as a metabolite. And that metabolite, that converted form of ibuprofen, will then continue on its merry little way through the bloodstream, but eventually make it to the kidneys, get filtered out, and we'll just pee it out, hopefully into the toilet. But the question is, during that conversion process in the liver, does that cause any potential harm to the liver? For the most part, no. ibuprofen is relatively safe for the liver. You can always find cases where there's certain situations where people have had some harm to the liver from taking ibuprofen, but again, for the most part, it's relatively safe. But if we compare that to the potential side effects of the stomach, that might be a little bit of a different story. So let's take a look at this other dissection here. So I've actually got two stomachs here. I've overlaid 2/3 of a stomach because we cut it right here, as you can see. And I just wanted to kind of give you the comparison of the full stomach. But the reason we show people this stomach is we love to show people the amazing inside lining of the stomach. This inside lining that I'm touching with my thumbs here is called the tunica mucosa. Called the tunica mucosa because it helps produce mucus. Now, one of the reasons why our stomach doesn't eat itself alive with its own acid or irritate itself is because we have that coating or that protective barrier of mucus between the acid and the actual lining of the stomach. So you think, here's the inside lining of the stomach, mucus, and then we've got that acid. But remember our discussion about prostaglandins and what they could do earlier. Prostaglandins also got involved in helping the stomach produce mucus and even regulating stomach acid. So if I take a medication that reduces the amount of prostaglandins, ibuprofen, then I reduce the potential amount of stomach mucus on that inside lining. And so I could thin out that protective barrier and make it more risky, or at least create a situation where the acid could irritate the stomach more easily because of that mucus being thinner or less produced. And so that's essentially how ibuprofen could affect the stomach or cause stomach irritation. Now, in general, people who take ibuprofen every once in a while, even if you take ibuprofen for a few days to help with a fever from like the flu or some other illness, for the most part, you're not going to have major stomach issues. We're more concerned about those who may be on ibuprofen every single day to help manage a chronic condition, say like maybe arthritis. Or we might be more concerned with patients who have a history of gastritis, which is inflammation of this inside lining, or maybe somebody who has peptic ulcer disease. But what about other organs like the kidneys? I mentioned the kidneys a little bit earlier when we talked about the ibuprofen passing through the liver, getting converted to a more inactive form that we refer to as a metabolite, and then those metabolites eventually made it to the kidneys and got excreted in the urine. Let's talk a little bit more about the details of that process and see if ibuprofen can have an effect on the kidneys. So here's a really cool dissection that we briefly saw earlier in the video, but more context, this is a frontal cut so we can see the internal anatomy of the kidneys. And the first thing I want to mention is this structure here called the renal artery. Renal just means kidney, and this renal artery is going to take blood into the kidney, and it'll branch multiple times. We'll go back to that story of that metabolite of the ibuprofen. Eventually, it's going to enter through this blood vessel and then get distributed throughout the kidneys. And like I mentioned, those blood vessels will continue to branch and branch and branch to the point where when they get into the cortex here, the outer portion of the kidney, they're microscopic. Can't see them with the naked eye. So if we zoomed in to the renal cortex, we'd see these awesome functional units referred to as a nephron. A nephron is a combination of urinary tubules as well as some tiny little blood vessels. And this is where we're going to see this filtration process between the cardiovascular system and the urinary system. In essence, we're going to create urine here. So there's going to be a fluid component from the cardiovascular system that's going to pass into these urinary tubules, and it'll take these waste products, including some of these metabolites, into the urinary tubules. So we've moved from the cardiovascular system now into the urinary system. And if we come back to this really cool kidney dissection, you can see these areas right here that I'm highlighting with the probe here, and these are referred to as renal pyramids. Now, these are full of tiny, tiny little collecting tubules that are collecting essentially urine, and they're going to take them out and funnel them into this process, or I should say this larger tube here called the renal pelvis, which then goes and becomes the ureter down to the bladder and hopefully again out into the toilet. So it's a really cool process that's happening 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But does that process of that metabolite from ibuprofen passing from the cardiovascular system into the urinary system cause a problem? Not so much. But there is a potential side effect with the kidneys and ibuprofen. It doesn't have to do with the process that I just went through and mentioned. It has to do with, again, what the prostaglandins do. Last thing we'll refer to back to the beginning of the video. Remember the prostaglandins, they did have an effect on the kidney, a vasodilatory effect, or in other words, they helped the tiny little blood vessels in that renal cortex vasodilate or stay open a little bit. And if you take ibuprofen and suppress prostaglandin synthesis, you no longer have quite as much influence to vasodilate those blood vessels, and they can start to vasoconstrict. Now, in what context would that be a problem? Somebody, again, who's taking ibuprofen every once in a while or for short periods of time, who's staying well hydrated, isn't going to have a much of a problem with that kind of vasoconstrictive effect of taking the ibuprofen. But let's say, again, we go back to that example, somebody who's taking it multiple times a day, every day, to help try to manage arthritis. Or in the sense of maybe somebody has kidney disease. If somebody already has kidney disease and you vasoconstrict those blood vessels, you might exacerbate that problem even further. So when I'm in the clinic and I'm talking about managing people's pain or inflammation or fevers with ibuprofen, we often will have a discussion around what their kidney status is. Do they have a history of kidney disease? Sometimes they'll even pull up their previous labs and see what their kidney function looks like. So those are some considerations that we have to do with, say, ibuprofen. And if I run into some of those problems, I may have to consider using some other pain medication to help manage their pain or their inflammation or their fevers. So that's probably enough detail on ibuprofen and its potential therapeutic effects versus its potential side effects. Now, granted, there are some side effects we didn't discuss, but we really wanted to focus on the main or the most common side effects in this video. Those others we can talk about in a future video. But I do want to mention one last thing about a really cool phrase that one of my favorite pharmacology professors mentioned when I was still in medical training. And that was in regards to us giving medications to patients. And she would often say this phrase, start low and go slow. In other words, start at the lowest therapeutic dose and slowly titrate up till you get the therapeutic response, and then you can stop there. In other words, you don't necessarily have to say jump like to 800 milligrams of ibuprofen if, say, someone's pain and inflammation could be controlled with 200 to 400 milligrams. Now, granted, everyone's situation is different. The pain levels, the condition you're treating, all of that matters when you're picking a medication as well as dosing. But I thought that was a really cool phrase, at least that could be used as a general rule for clinicians and even for people who are going to manage their own health with over-the-counter medications. Now, in this video, we put so many little puzzle pieces together. We put the pieces of human physiology and how they would interact with ibuprofen. If you like puzzles and problem solving like that, you're probably going to also like the sponsor of this video named Brilliant. Brilliant is an interactive online learning platform for STEM subjects. That is math, logic, science, and computer science. They have some really cool courses on scientific thinking, which we did a lot of in this video. And they're very interactive, they're fun, and those are great combinations when you're trying to learn something and make it stick. And problem solving and applying those skills and those details to real world situations is one of the best things you can do in education. That's one of the things I've loved to see students do when they've come through the anatomy lab, apply that knowledge to everything they're going to be doing in their future and their profession. And Brilliant offers all of these courses to help with this. If you're interested, I'll put the link in the description, but you can also go to brilliant.org/IHA, and they're going to give the first 200 people 20% off to their yearly subscription. And again, that link's in the description, and we'll see you in the next video.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Business editor Richard Southern joins us, and we begin with Canada's real estate market, which is heating back up again to levels we haven't seen since before the pandemic. Here, Richard.
Hey, Erica, good to see you. It's not just in Toronto and Vancouver that the real estate market is scorching hot. That's the case pretty much everywhere you look in Canada now, according to the latest numbers that we got in today. It showed that October was one of the hottest months ever in terms of sales. And home sales were up 8.6% in October on a month-over-month basis, second best month ever. Real estate brokers, Erica, say that buyers aren't discouraged because fewer homeowners are willing to put their homes on the market. We did see, as a result, new listings fall some 20% year on year in October, but the houses that were up for sale got bought up quickly. Brokers say that people who do want to move up are kind of crippled because they can't find anything to move to until they sell their house. On a national basis, the average price just above $716,000 for a home. Of course, in the city of Toronto, it's more than $1 million. Same story for Vancouver. Some experts, some economists now, Erica, are again calling on the federal government, the local levels of government to maybe try and get involved and try and rein in this market, which seems to just keep going up.
Certainly, the parent company of Tim Hortons is snapping up another fast food chain.
I know. Are you like me? Do you like a big hoagie sandwich now and again?
Yeah, sometimes, I guess.
I probably like that a bit more than you. I like, I like the oil on it. I like the whole deal, the fully loaded sub. Sign me up for that. It's great if you're hungry, but is it $1 billion great? Tim Hortons thinks so. Timmy's is buying that store next door, Firehouse Subs, for $1 billion. Now, Firehouse, they have about 1,200 locations across Canada and the U.S. The first location of the sub shop opened in Florida in 1994. What these guys do differently from like a Subway or a Mr. Sub is that the cheese and the veggies and the meat that you order, it's cooked and steamed on a flat top before being piled on a bun. The sandwich chain is now the fourth brand in the Restaurant Brands portfolio. That company now owns Popeyes, Burger King, Tim Hortons, and Firehouse Subs. There's a lot of money in those hoagies, Erica. Firehouse expected to generate $1.1 billion in system-wide sales this year. I should lay off the hoagies a little bit. They're so good.
They're so good, though. Okay, and finally, who would spend $6,000 a night to stay in a Disney hotel? Well, it turns out quite a lot of people would.
Are you a big enough aficionado of Star Wars that you would drop $6,000?
$6,000? It's a lot of money, but I hope it's an immersive experience, as I've heard it is.
Yeah, that's what they're billing it as, right? In Orlando, the Star Wars themed hotel. You spend 2 nights, a story unfolds around you. All the workers are cast members. It's $6,000 for 2 nights, but this is a hotel that has booked solid now for the first 4 months after it opens in March. The first available day to book is the last week of July. So Disney really capitalizing, I think, on everyone looking for that post-pandemic holiday. They want a Star Wars experience, and they're willing to pay big money, Eric.
I will go with anyone who's willing to pay for me. Let's go together.
Me too.
Okay.
Sign us up.
Okay, business editor Richard Southern. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks.
I'm craving wings.
Frigidaire's range lets you air fry right in your oven. It's all the flavor, none of the guilt.
So good.
That's using your Frigidaire.
You can't slow down time, but with Microsoft 365, you can make the most of each moment you have. Organizing your day still leaves you plenty of time to enjoy it. And losing your budget doesn't mean burning the midnight oil. Microsoft 365 brings premium Office apps together, cloud storage, and more in one easy subscription. So you can make the most of your time.
For the moment, we're turning to Saudi Arabia, a country that for years has been known for its ultra-conservative nature. Women here had very few
New Prenamel Intensive Enamel Repair Whitening. Why just brush to clean when you can do more? You can brush and
rights and freedoms. But the kingdom is now opening up.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service to our country. Ambassadors, should ambassadors ever try to influence host country elections?
No.
I think you said in your opening statement, partisanship of this type is not compatible with the role of a career foreign service officer. Is that right?
Yeah.
But that's exactly what happened in 2016. In August of 2016, the very month you went to Ukraine as our ambassador, the Ukrainian ambassador here in the United States, Ambassador Chali, wrote an op-ed in The Hill, said this: Trump's comments send wrong message. So the very month you're over there as our ambassador to Ukraine, Ambassador Chali writes that op-ed, and it wasn't just that attack, as Mr. Kasser got into earlier, it wasn't just that attack on the president. We had former Ukrainian Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, who criticized candidate Trump. We had Mr. Avakov. I believe earlier you said, Ambassador, that Mr. Avakov was the individual who first alerted you to the efforts of Mr. Giuliani. Mr. Avakov, back during this same time period in the months just prior to the 2016 election, called then candidate Trump all kinds of names, called him a terrorist. And of course, you have Mr. Leshchenko, a member of parliament, who was a source for Fusion GPS and now somewhat famous dossier that flowed from Fusion's work. He said this in the Financial Times again in August of 2016 when you first arrived in Ukraine. He said this: the majority of Ukrainian politicians are on Hillary Clinton's side. So you had several high-ranking officials in the government, in the Ukrainian government, and when President Poroshenko was president of Ukraine, criticized President Trump, then candidate Trump, all in the late summer and fall of 2016. What I want to know, Ambassador, when this was all happening, did you go talk to anyone in the Ukrainian government about this? Did you go say to some of these officials, hey, you guys need to knock this off, this perception that we got, as Mr. Leshchenko said, the majority of Ukrainian politicians on Hillary Clinton's side, that's not good. Did you have that conversation?
No.
Didn't talk to anyone in the government? Did you talk to President Poroshenko?
No.
Didn't alert anyone in the government?
No.
Well, one of the things we've heard so much over the last 6 weeks in depositions, and frankly in the hearing on Wednesday, is how important bipartisan support is for Ukraine. Democrats and Republicans agree they want to help Ukraine. In fact, the Democrats' first witness, their star witness on Wednesday, Mr. Taylor said Ukraine's most important strategic asset is this bipartisan support. And you would agree with that, right?
I do.
He said this in his testimony on Wednesday. On September 11th, I learned that the hold had been lifted the next day. Ambassador Taylor said, I conveyed this news to President Zelensky and the Ukrainian foreign minister, and I reminded Mr. Yarmulke of the high strategic value of bipartisan support for Ukraine and the importance of not getting involved in other countries' elections. So what I'm wondering is, this is the day after the aid's been lifted that Ambassador Taylor made this statement to the Ukrainian government. And he makes this after there's nothing been done by Ukraine to influence our election. Because President Zelensky didn't announce he was doing an investigation and the aid was lifted. But he felt he needed to say that. But in 2016, when we know that the majority of Ukrainian politicians want Clinton to win, because it was said by a member of parliament, when the ambassador to the United States from Ukraine writes an op-ed criticizing then candidate Trump, when Mr. Avakov calls candidate Trump all kinds of names, nobody goes and talks to him and tells him to knock it off. Did you have any conversations, Ambassador, with Victoria Nuland or Secretary of State Perry about what was going on in 2016 and this majority of Ukrainian politicians being for candidate Clinton and not opposed to President Trump?
No, I did not.
No one did anything. No one did anything. You see what? Maybe the president was a little concerned.
Vous pensez connaître la vie en résidence? Détrompez-vous.
Yeah,
Chez Chartwell, le
yeah, definitely. Good idea.
About what went on in Ukraine, and you couple that with the corruption level that we know exists in Ukraine, you add to that this idea that he's not a big fan of foreign aid, why he might be a little concerned about sending the hard-earned tax dollars of the American people to Ukraine.
I'm sorry, is there a question there?
There was.
Okay, could you repeat it, please?
I'm asking.
The gentleman's expired, but I'll let you to repeat the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm asking, maybe we can kind of see why the president was a little concerned when you have the highest ranking officials in the government, the ambassador criticizing him, parliamentary member Lashchenko criticizing him, when you have Avakov, the guy who first told you about Giuliani, criticizing him. All this going on, and when you couple that with the concerns he has about corruption, the concerns he has about Europe not doing enough, the concerns he has about reluctance to send in the hard-earned tax dollars to any country.
Jordan, I have indulged you with extra time, but
I appreciate it.
Indulgence is wearing out.
I appreciate it.
There is a question.
Our indulgence wore out with you a long time ago, Mr. Chairman. I'll tell you that.
I'm about to gavel you down, so if you have a question, I suggest you.
I'm asking her: do you think there's maybe a reason that this was that President Trump's concern was justified?
You know, I can't speak for the president on this, but what I would say is you've listed a number of actions. I think from my point of view, that doesn't create a Ukrainian government strategy to interfere in our election.
I didn't say that.
Mr. Jordan, please allow the ambassador to answer the question.
So I would just say that, U.S. politicians will often criticize policies of foreign counterparts, even perhaps during their elections. This happens in politics, and I think that it doesn't necessarily constitute interference.
Would you ever write an op-ed
Jordan, your time has
critical of
expired.
a presidential candidate in Ukraine?
Jordan, your time has expired. Mr. Welch, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like every.
Mr. Chairman, we have a video we'd like to play.
Mr. Chairman.
We have a video we'd like to play.
Mr. Chairman.
Dean,
I object.
privilege does Ms. Dean seek recognition?
I object. I'm reserving my right to object to the video. May I inquire as to whether the gentleman has followed the Judiciary Committee's AV protocol by providing 48 hours notice to the committee's clerk that he was going to use a video?
We provided notice. Well, first of all, there's no 48-hour rule. It's not in the committee rules. Second, we did let the committee staff, the majority, know that we had a video, and we gave the video to them this morning.
Responding to the gentlelady's request, he did not. He did not supply the 48 hours rule. 48 hours notice required by the rule.
Mr. Chairman.
And I insist on my objection. Having failed to follow the bipartisan protocol, I insist on my objection.
An objection has been heard. The video will not be shown.
I appeal the ruling of the chair.
Appealing. There's been no ruling that was made. There's been no ruling that was made. There's been an objection.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to speak regarding.
No, that's out of order. This is not debatable.
What's out of order is there is no rule that requires a 48-hour notice. That's what's out of order.
There is such a rule.
There is not in our rules.
Mr. Chairman, what are you afraid of?
There is such a rule. You objected last year. You were told there was such a rule.
Mr. Chairman, what are our colleagues on the other side of the aisle afraid of? Are they afraid of videos of parents?
The gentleman was recognized for his opening statement. Is he finished with his opening statement?
I'm not finished with the opening.
Seek recognition for a
moment. It's not a rule. It's not a rule. It's what you said. I think the term you used is it's protocol.
The gentlewoman objected.
Conduct of the committee. Rules do. That's not a rule. We had a video. We understood you had a video.
I seek recognition for a parliamentary inquiry.
Gentlewoman objected because you failed to follow the rule. Her objection is sustained.
Mr. Chairman, I seek.
The gentleman have anything else
See,
We had a
recognition for a parliamentary inquiry.
We had, yeah, but I'll yield back in just a second, and particularly for you. No, I haven't yelled back yet. I said I will in a second. It's a video about parents at school board meetings, moms and dads speaking at school board meetings, and you guys aren't going to let us play it?
It will not be played. An objection has been heard that you failed to give the 48 hours required by the rule, and therefore.
What rule? Mr. Chairman, what rule? Parliamentary, what rule? Please present the rule.
The case of audio visual materials under the leadership of my predecessor, Chairman Goodlatte, Republican, the committee developed a written protocol for managing the use of audiovisual materials in our hearings. This protocol simply requires members to provide 48 hours notice they are going to use audiovisual materials. Until recently, this protocol was not controversial. It was a helpful tool we used to manage hearings and make sure videos played properly. The gentlewoman has objected to the materials because the gentleman did not provide the agreed upon 48 hours notice. Playing audiovisual materials during a committee hearing is the equivalent of introducing printed materials into the hearing record. In the normal course of business, we do not object to each other's requests, but members have the right to object if they so choose, and an objection has been heard.
Mr. Chairman, did we ever vote on that?
That's a clever written statement, but a protocol is not a rule.
Statement.
Mr. Chairman, obviously you're not going to let us play it. Obviously you're going to censor us, which is sort of the conduct of the left today, it seems, and Democrats today, it seems. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. A point of order. Gentleman will state his point of order.
The actual written rule, this is not a rule.
And it's not a point of order, as I said before. Playing audiovisual materials during committee hearing is the equivalent of introducing printed materials into the hearing record. In the normal course of business, we do not object to each other's requests, but members have the right to object if they so choose, and an objection has been heard.
Well, sir, I asked you to rule on my point of order.
The gentleman has not made a valid point of order. The gentleman.
Move the table. Move the table.
There's nothing to appeal. There's been no ruling. There's been no ruling. There's just been an objection, and the objection has been heard.
Showcase your company with high-quality branded merchandise like shirts, drinkware, bags, and gadgets. We'll set you up with one of our
Jonas not recognized. So it's out in there, 4 gentlemen scripts.
Ghislaine Maxwell is speaking out for the first time since she was arrested last year. The former girlfriend and associate of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein is now facing a host of charges herself. But if she faces the possibility that she could spend the rest of her life behind bars, she is criticizing her treatment by the guards of the Brooklyn Metropolitan Detention Center, saying they stare at her as she showers and they have ignored complaints of rats in her cell. Maxwell also says she doesn't believe she will get a fair trial, which is expected to kick off in 2 weeks on November 29th. So joining me now to discuss the latest are attorney Michael Bixby and legal and media analyst Lionel. Thank you both for joining me today. Michael, let's start with you. What do you make of Maxwell's claim that she already knows she won't get a fair trial?
Well, I'm not surprised at that coming from the defendant, obviously. One of their strategies is going to be to lay as many seeds for potential appeal. If the verdict ends up not in her favor, that they're going to be able to fight it. and to try to lay that groundwork as well beforehand is going to be a fight against some of the negative media coverage. It's not a lot of positive media coverage given the situation with Epstein and given what the allegations are here. It's pretty bad conduct. So I think it's definitely tough, and I think that's probably part and parcel to her legal strategy in the case is going to be deflect away and try to create some sympathy for herself.
Right, and certainly talking about it beforehand and saying it's not going to be fair, and then she's hoping that she can come back around and say, hey, I told you it wasn't going to be fair if the outcome looks to be at least what she seems to think that it's going to be. Now, Lionel, when we're looking at the comments we heard from Maxwell, I mean, from rats to creepy guards, she seems to be looking to gain sympathy from the public right now. But how do statements like that affect her case when she's going up against charges of sex trafficking children?
Well, the first thing is, point number one is that she is presumed innocent. She hasn't been convicted of anything. She is as guilty as all of us. Not at all. And what they do to people is they confuse in this kind of a Joe Arpaio world that you make people who are awaiting trial suffer. Point number two, I don't know what she's possibly going to have as a defense in her case. What? You got the wrong person? It's not me. Point number three, if I could pick a fantasy outcome of this, I'd have her say, turn this camera on. Let me tell you the real story. These are the people that I was involved in with Jeffrey Epstein. The following names, you'll recognize them. Shall I go through? And all of a sudden, the camera will turn off, and lo and behold, I think she'll get a better prison cell. Because what I don't understand is, where are the tapes? Where is all of the evidence? Where are all of the people that she knows that she actually was a part of, allegedly, in acting as a broker, so to speak, for this sex predation and child abuse? I mean, what is she waiting for? I don't understand why they haven't made a deal with her. She
will be murdered in jail, just like he was.
To the biggest sex trafficking ring in modern history, and she's arguing about granny pants and her underwear doesn't fit. Come on. I mean, this seems there's something not right with this.
Yeah, it really is interesting the fact that she's not, or at least does not seem to be speaking up more and kind of giving that list, because you know that she has the information. Right now she's looking at spending the rest of her life behind bars. I mean, I guess now is as good a time as any to talk. But now, Michael, when it comes to people who are talking, we know that there are several women who have accused Epstein of abusing them when they were children, including Virginia Giuffre, who are expected to testify as part of this trial. So how much of a role are they likely to have in this, and what could end up being the length sentence?
I think they're a big part of it. I think they play a key role. And really, if you look at it and you say, well, wait, why are they pursuing her? I think it's because she's the biggest name, the biggest link. Unfortunately, what happened is Mr. Epstein is dead. He's no longer with us, whether you get into conspiracy theories on it or not. And this is the next big figurehead for them to go against in this scheme. And so I do think that the witnesses about their personal experiences who are going to tie her directly to the trafficking through the testimony they've talked about as her delivering them there are going to be extremely important, that they're going to come across as credible and believable in order to prove her case. And you've got to think that if Mr. Epstein was still alive, would she have used some of the information she had and been able to make a deal? But right now, with what deal is the government offering her? Because how important is it to them after the debacle with Epstein that she's actually convicted, that they actually sustain a conviction in this case?
All right, especially after all that they have gotten wrong literally in the last several decades whenever it comes related to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Lionel, speaking of some of those big figureheads, I mean, even if Ghislaine Maxwell doesn't...
The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping.
The people that she worked with, how likely is the spotlight to turn to others, such as, say, Prince Andrew and the like, after her trial is over, and to start pursuing cases against them, possibly?
While the trial is over, how about in the middle of the trial? You know, right up the street from where I am right now was the Epstein mansion. This was a recording studio for years, and his islands and his planes. Where are the thousands, perhaps, of hours of thumbnails and disk drives and hard drives? She's going to go through the list, and I can't wait until her lawyer says, well, let's talk about your involvement. What exactly did you do? Well, I didn't, I guess, contract with young women for me. It was for A, B, C, D, E. Just imagine this. Hold it, cut. Well, there's no cut in a trial because the government, remember, they wanted this, they've got it. So she's going to start singing and telling everything because her attitude is, look, if you want to bury me, go ahead. But I'm going to take a lot of people with me because this stakes. I'm much more powerful than you think I am. And I want to be treated with respect. I know that sounds kind of corny, but that's exactly what she thinks. She's not somebody off the street. She's serious.
Oh, especially someone who has lived a life of luxury in the way that she has. Now, Michael, when it comes to the information that could come out of this trial, whether it's the names of other Epstein associates, whether it's, the information that some of these girls bring up about what they went through, do you see that as likely to lead to even a longer legal battle even after they get Ghislaine Maxwell behind bars for once and for all?
Sure, I think that's entirely possible. Does this lead to other people? Are there other people involved? And I think that's a fair point. But does Maxwell even testify in the case? I'm not so sure she will. I mean, traditionally, the idea is she can't be forced to. She can invoke a Fifth Amendment right. She's not going to have to necessarily testify. But the legal strategy and what they're going to do to defend the case, that's the bigger question. But I think you're 100% right. Does this lead to future prosecutions? Are there additional people who are implicated in this? I think you have to listen closely to the testimony that's coming out. And I think there even might be stuff in the trial that doesn't happen. The government's already working on behind the scenes with other people who might be implicated in this and who are probably already under investigation.
Yeah, certainly a lot to look forward to there. Lionel, we've got about 30 seconds left. I'll give you the final word here.
Well, remember, the bottom line is the people who have been victimized by Ghislaine, allegedly, and Epstein are the countless women who could come into court and say, let me tell you who abused me. I'm still waiting for this. Ghislaine Maxwell she's a nobody. What about the women who were basically raped and basically trafficked over the years? What about their defendants, their abusers? We're only talking about two people, Epstein and Ghislaine. Where are the others? That's what I want to hear.
Yeah, and hopefully we will hear from them and they will finally get their day in court. Lionel and Michael Bixby, thank you so much for your time and insight on this one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Air peaked last month.
Sylvania's headlight experts want to demonstrate just how much visibility your car's headlight bulbs can lose before burnout. So we've taken away 50 feet of visibility from this walk home. Don't wait until burnout. Visit Canadian Tire for longer-lasting Sylvania LEDs today and see better tonight.
The U.S. Justice Department sued Uber over allegations of overcharging disabled passengers and asked a federal court to order compliance with an anti-discrimination law. The lawsuit targets an April 2016 Uber policy of charging passengers wait time fees, saying blind people or users of wheelchairs or walkers need more than 2 minutes to get into an Uber. For the first time since the pandemic started, Germany's COVID infections exceeded 50,000 new cases for the last 24 hours, as several of the worst-hit states introduced new restrictions aimed at non-vaccinated people. Karolina Pliskova has kick-started her 5th WTA Tour Finals campaign with a battling 3-set victory over fellow former world number 1 Garbiñe Muguruza. The Czech dropped the first set and squandered 3 match points in the decider before closing out a 4-6, 6-2, 7-6 win. Estonia's Annette Kontaveit stunned second seed and French Open champion Barbara Krejcikova 6-3, 6-4 in the other match in this group. Former Liverpool and England captain Steven Gerrard has been appointed as the new manager of Premier League club Aston Villa. The 41-year-old has signed a 3.5-year contract and replaces Dean Smith, who was sacked on Sunday after a run of 5 straight defeats. Gerrard joins from Scottish champions Rangers, who led to their first league title in 10 years last season.
Xi Jinping has cemented his position as China's leader for life. You must have heard about it. The Communist Party has wrapped up its 4-day-long conclave today. It passed a resolution, one that put Xi Jinping in the same league as Communist Party legends. Names like Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. Xi Jinping now has the same status as these two leaders. Today's resolution cements Xi Jinping's place in Chinese history, but it makes no mention of the problems that China is dealing with. Problems like the Evergrande debt crisis. Chinese markets were in panic mode yesterday as the Communist Party leadership was meeting. It was make or break for Evergrande. The cash-strapped developer was staring at deadlines. Payments worth $148 million were due. Remember, Evergrande had missed the first deadline. The company had a 30-day grace period. Then we got a flash. It said, Evergrande officially defaulted. The announcement came from a German firm called DMSA. DMSA is a foreign investor of Evergrande. It had put money in Evergrande bonds and it hadn't received any payments. So DMSA announced that it is suing Evergrande. The press release said this, and I'm quoting, DMSA is preparing bankruptcy proceedings against Evergrande. It calls on all bond investors to join it. Then we got another flash. Turns out Evergrande did make the payments after all, but at the very last minute. So technically, it has averted a default for now. But for how long can it keep going like this? Remember, this company owes $300 billion. $300 billion in debt. So a payment of $148 million doesn't even begin to solve the crisis. Evergrande investors live through the same nightmare every time a payment is due. The company had 3 payments to make in the past month, and on all 3 occasions, it paid at the very last minute. They're pushing their luck, and experts see through that. S&P Global Ratings has made an assessment. This is what it says. The fundamental situation for Evergrande has not really changed. We remain sure that default is almost a certainty. Evergrande is a ticking time bomb, and it's about to blow up in the face of foreign investors. Why do I say that? Why foreign investors? Because Beijing has reportedly come up with a plan for Evergrande. It won't bail out the company. It will go for what is being called a controlled implosion of Evergrande. What does that mean? What is a controlled implosion? It basically means that the company will be allowed to fail in parts. It will be allowed to fail gradually. Some assets will be sold off, some will be allowed to fail. Home buyers and businesses, the ones involved in Evergrande projects, will be protected. The damage to them is going to be limited. But what about foreign investors? There is no cushion for them. They're on their own. Going by this report, looking out for foreign investors is not a priority for Beijing. China doesn't care for them. So they could lose money. China's priority is the Communist Party and its interests. And Evergrande is critical to that. The financial health of Evergrande is directly linked to China's domestic stability. Listen to this. Evergrande owes money to 171 domestic banks in China. In other words, if this company fails, it hits 171 domestic banks in China. Also 1.5 million Chinese people. That's how many people have bought homes with Evergrande. Their deposits are at stake. Their life savings are at stake. And these homes are yet to be built. If Evergrande fails to deliver, can you imagine the kind of social unrest that is going to follow? Let me show you a trailer. When news about Evergrande broke, there were massive protests in China. We showed you these images there. Angry homeowners and investors reached Evergrande headquarters. They barged in and they demanded their money back. A woman even
let's go ahead and move in here for the GOP. As you said, never underestimate the GOP's ability in order to shoot itself in the foot. There's been a little squabble, which I find very, very interesting, around the future of the Republican Party. Kind of try to track these 2024 trends and all of that. And the one you might have seen in cable news, which actually is worth delving a little bit into, is the current spat between Chris Christie and Donald Trump. So you guys will recall, Chris Christie was the first establishment Republican, or sorry, the second, I believe, after Jeff Sessions, when he dropped out of the Republican primary in 2016 and shocked America whenever he endorsed Trump. I mean, it was truly like a speechless moment for a lot of people.
Blew up Marco Rubio on his way out.
Blew up Marco Rubio, suicide bomb Marco Rubio on his way out, then gets nuked in the New Hampshire primary, and then what? He endorses Donald Trump. It's a landmark moment. Ultimately, it doesn't end up working out for him. Trump kind of emasculates him, even in the video, whenever Christie endorsed him. Christie never ended up getting a high-profile position within the Trump administration. I think he wanted to be Attorney General, and Trump would just never give it to him.
Kushner had
right?
blood. He killed that. Yeah,
he killed the transition. This is all ancient history at this point. But Christie backed him. He prepped him for the debate. Remember that? Remember he even got COVID prepping.
He died.
He nearly died. Yeah, he actually writes about that in his book. But Christie has decided that he wants to even possibly challenge Trump for the 2024 nomination. I'll say at the top, I don't think any of this has a chance in hell to work out. But that being said, the spat itself is interesting. So we'll put this on the screen. What happened is that Chris Christie gave a speech and basically said, look, we need to move on from this election fraud stuff. Trump went ahead and blasted him in a statement saying that we cannot move past the election fraud. Winning campaigns are campaigns that look forward and not backwards, is what Christie had originally said at the Republican Jewish Coalition meeting in Las Vegas on Sunday. What I found interesting is that even at that meeting, there was silence whenever he made that. There was a lot of discomfort among some of the attendees because they knew that it was a direct shot against Trump himself. Trump obviously took notice of that. He said Chris Christie, who made a speech in Las Vegas, was massacred by his statements. The Republicans have to move on. Everybody remembers Christie left New Jersey with a less than 9% approval rating, a record low, and they don't want to hear any of this from him. Christie then responds in an Axios interview, which just aired, which again I found very interesting. Let's take a listen.
Elections for Republicans need to be about the future, not the grievances of the past. Donald Trump put out a statement saying you've gotten absolutely massacred.
Yeah, well, look, I've made the conscious decision, Mike, that I want to spend my time combating the policies of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and trying to help Republicans win governorships and the House and the Senate in 2022. This is not an argument that I'll walk away from.
And then he went for it. He said, everybody remembers that Chris left New Jersey with a less than 9% approval rating. What do you make of him, like, saying you had a less than 9% approval rating?
Look, I'm not going to get into a back and forth with Donald Trump, but what I will say is this. When I ran for re-election in 2013, I got 60% of the vote. When he ran for re-election, he lost to Joe Biden. I'm happy to have that comparison stand up because that's the one that really matters.
Oh, a little bit of a parting shot there from Chris Christie. And again, man, it's difficult to parse this one, Crystal. I mean, he did supplicate himself before Trump for like 5 straight years. And it's like after he loses, then he's willing to call him out. But the fact is, Chris Christie was one of the most popular GOP politicians in this country for years. Everybody thinks he missed a shot by not running against Obama back in 2012. And then in the post-Trump age, he very much sees the election fraud stuff, kind of like I do as well, as just an absolute noose around the neck of the party, because it's one of those things where, well, look, will the Republicans win just because of discontent back in 2022? Absolutely. But when you bring this back to the fore, and you really are going to convince your entire base that the election was stolen, and not just that, I mean, you and I have seen this repeatedly, which is attempts by Republican politicians to say, yeah, but what he really meant is that big tech and the media were, I'm like, no, he doesn't mean that. Like, what he means,
any of that.
and what he means, and what the people who believe him say, is that the Dominion Venezuelans literally, like, used bamboo ballots from China to steal the election. They believe that. And I love, for the people who believe it, they trust him a lot. I wish it was otherwise, but that's just the truth. And I'm not going to patronize them by saying, no, what they really mean is this. I know what they mean. They're incorrect, and it's okay, hope they would listen to the show. But really what it is that you can see how that level of noxiousness, that just leads people to either exit the electoral system or just vote against you because they can't stand that stuff. It will remain a huge problem for the Republicans that so many people in the Beltway just want to look past. And just because they do well in 2022 based upon an oppositional message does not mean that you can run affirmatively on a case that the election was completely stolen and that you will win again. It has dangerous consequences both for your own chances, as we saw in Georgia, whenever people were like, Republicans were like, oh, well, what's the point? Why should I even come out and vote? We have seen that repeatedly. Trump himself came forward and was trying to pull the same stuff possibly in Virginia, if the results went the other way. These are not good results for your actual own base. And if you make it the centerpiece, as Trump himself is making this the defining issue of his campaign and of loyalty to him, whether you think the election was stolen or not, well, it's just going to create an albatross around your neck going forward. So, it's just one of these things where Christie is not the right messenger, but he is directionally correct that you cannot be the person who makes this the only defining thing about what makes you a Republican. And I'm not saying that. Donald Trump, the leader of the Republican Party, was saying that.
Yeah.
If you don't agree with that, then that's fine, but that doesn't actually make you a Republican. And that's part of the problem, which is that if that's all there is, then, it's going to be very difficult to win national elections in the future.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of electoral calculus, if Christie actually wants to win a Republican nomination, this is not going to work out. Is he correct that this is a major problem for the Republican Party? I think we've had proof of that over the past couple of years. And you pointed to it. When Trump was very involved, very visible, they went on to lose 2 seats in Georgia that they had no business losing. And remember at the time when we saw on election night that those 2 were going to a runoff, forget about it. Because the history in Georgia, first of all, I mean, Democrats have long struggled to win the state, number one. Number two, the history in Georgia is in these runoff elections, Republicans always routinely outperform whatever they did in the general election in November. That was the longstanding trend. It took a whole onslaught of Trump and his whole tribe of crazy people.
Wood,
Well, yeah, and all those people
TBT.
whose names I want to, consign to the dustbin of my memory. All of them had to come together to get the GOP to lose those very winnable seats and hand control of the Senate over to the Democrats. In California, you saw how because Larry Elder was more closely tied to Trumpism, in the end, there was a huge wave for Democrats ultimately that led Gavin Newsom to easily survive what was truly perilous waters for him at one point. In contrast, in Virginia, Trump stayed away. He stayed quiet. Youngkin was able to walk that very narrow line of not pissing off the Trump base so much that they wouldn't vote for him, but not really affirming the president, just sort of dog whistling towards the, we're worried about election security, et cetera, but not enough to turn off independent voters. I think if Trump had showed up in the state of Virginia, I think he would have lost. I mean, if he had been more visible, one of the biggest favors that's been done for the Republican Party and for Trump and his personal favorability with the country at this point is that all the social media giants kicked him off the platform.
The platform is the best thing that ever happened.
It totally is, and it's the best thing that's happened in the Republican Party because he's so much quieter, and so people kind of forget how insane and delusional, obnoxious, and just divisive and toxic he is to the country.
Right.
They've sort of forgotten, some of the edge has been taken off of that. But yeah, when you get to 2024, if he's the GOP nominee, that's all going to be front and center again. Of course, on the other hand, Democrats are going to run either Joe Biden's carcass, Kamala Harris, or Pete Buttigieg. And so they're equally screwed. So that's kind of where things stand right now.
Yes, and just to give you guys an update, how this all works out. Oh, I did not mention this. Chris Christie actually even has mentioned he might run even if Trump runs again. So put that tweet on the screen, in which he said that, following the path of baseless claims is not going to work, and that he would be a productive voice for the party going forward, even if Trump does run again. But to give you an idea of how this is all manifesting on a policy level, we mentioned this in our last show. Put this Trump statement up there on the screen. He is now saying that he is willing to field primary challengers against the House Republicans who voted for the infrastructure bill and the Bannon contempt and impeachment charge, including Mace, McKinley, and Smith there in the House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. I mean, just amazing, which is that, if you voted for an infrastructure bill, especially these Northeastern Republicans, which has a 70% approval rating amongst Republicans in their district, then you're not a real Republican. Yeah, that's really going to work out well for democracy.
Which is that similar infrastructure bill that was proposed by Trump.
Exactly. And, it's like if you're going to set the standard that no dollar is legitimate if you vote to spend for it under a Democrat, then you're just a complete moron and you just destroyed the U.S. Congress, which is what the Tea Party did and what many of these people said that they were moving on from. But, what goes around comes around, and it's all just a cynical cultural war.
Do you think that Christie is just posturing for a more highly paid media gig or sell books? Or
He's a multi-millionaire. I think his wife works on Wall Street.
There's never enough of them. They always want more.
Maybe you're right. I don't know. I think he likes being relevant. I think he likes being on TV. I think that he probably legitimately believes that in his mind, he's probably like, I'm the one who endorsed Trump from the beginning, so it's most legitimate for me. I had a connection to the Republican base for years, which is true. He's very high name ID, all of that. But look, it's a farce. He failed in the 2016 campaign. He would utterly, fall on his face in a Republican campaign in 2024. That being said, I do think The Voice, it's not bad. I think it is important for people to hear this stuff.
In a lot of ways, Trump took his lane. Because
he was the bombastic,
he was a brash asshole. And then Trump was more of a brash asshole, and Christie kind of looked small next to Trump in the debate stage. He wasn't as big of a personality as Trump ultimately was. Because, remember, Christie, made his name yelling at teachers at town hall. Yes. That was, his thing. But look, his politics to me are terrible. But I always thought he was very politically talented.
Oh, he was, and he's actually a smart guy. I've seen him speak back in 2015, 2014, and more. I remember went to a conference once where he was at. I was blown away.
He's very talented.
His grasp of the policy details and more. Look, I'm a nerd. That stuff doesn't actually resonate with people.
Yeah, but you see, he's got the charisma to back it up.
Exactly.
Like when he took out Marco Rubio. Like I said, I would watch that moment on repeat all day, because he just thoroughly exposed that man at that moment.
Yes.
He really exposed him for being extraordinarily shallow, overly prepped by his consultants, had his talking point, and he couldn't do anything other than repeat his talking points. And Christie called him out on that So if it wasn't for I think if Christie had run back in 2012,
I think he might have
when
won,
there was a
honestly.
whole effort from GOP elites to recruit him in and a lot of money was behind it, he decided to take a pass. I think if Christie ends up being the Republican nominee instead of Romney, I think he had a better shot at winning
He definitely.
that matchup against Obama, because Romney was just such a character. He's so awkward, like, all of his weird sayings that he to the right height and finders all that stuff. Christie was a more formidable opponent, but he just missed his window.
He
Now
missed
the
his
party
window.
is Trump's, and that's that.
Yeah, that's right. And Christie was, in many ways, he was a lot more liberal on a lot of the culture war politics, kind of in the same way that Trump was. He was bombastic, anti-political correctness in a very New Jersey type way, foreshadowing the Trump wave.
Yeah.
He had a high number of Hispanic voters who backed him in the state of New Jersey. He was quite a competent governor. I mean, from a basic competence standpoint, and he's actually a pretty smart guy. He really did have all of it going for him, but I do think that he just nuked his chances by tying himself to Trump and being embarrassed on the national stage now for 5 years. That being said, it's an interesting development. We'll continue to track it.
Yeah, the media
Okay.
love him. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut. Our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions. All that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.
The new Alpha Taco with Hadron MCP, a revolution lightweight warmth and durability.
Good morning and happy Monday. We have a great show for you all today. I'm joined, of course, by the great Emily Jasinski. Good morning, Emily.
Good morning, Ryan. It's good to be here, and we do have a fantastic lineup this morning. Colin Rahero and Rena Shaw are in for Team Rising. We're going to get into Ghislaine Maxwell's really bizarre tell-all interview with the Daily Mail on the conditions of her jail cell. If you haven't read it, it's very strange. Now, contributing editor Jacobin, also Matt Card, he's here to discuss the publication's recent study on working-class voters and what it will take to secure their votes come election cycles. But first, Alyssa Farah, who you all probably know from her time here on Rising, is predicting that her former boss, Mike Pence, will run against Donald Trump in 2024, citing shame from Pence over January 6th and going sideways with Trump after confirming Joe Biden's presidential win. So Farah, who actually served as Pence's press secretary from 2017 to 2019, said that Pence hopes to court Trump's base as well as Republican voters who were, quote, alienated by Trump. Ryan, what do you make of that prediction? Do you think coming from Alyssa, it means that this is something that's really serious?
I think so. I mean, she knows what she's talking about with that crew. She was working for both of them.
Right.
And she also watched, Trump in some ways, brought this on himself. Lindsey Graham and others begged Trump after his little putsch failed to make up with Pence.
Yeah.
Your crew was out there chanting that they were going to hang the guy. You left him hang out to dry for hours in the Capitol. You've been dogging him publicly and privately for months. You asked him, as Lindsey Graham said, you asked him to do more than he could do. So just make up with him. Say you're sorry. And Trump's like, no. That's not doing it. So Pence, maybe he wants to kamikaze his way through this. I don't see him winning a nomination, but he could do some damage.
I was going to say, that's what's interesting to me about what Alyssa said, is that actually Pence's lane in his mind and his advisor's mind might be the almost anti-Trump lane. And that's kind of hard to conceive of because that's impossible, but it's impossible with this Republican base right now. But it's also not sort of how Mike Pence talks about that administration. It's certainly not how he talks about January 6th. So I don't know what that lane would actually be. I can understand how, yeah, it's true that there were some Republicans that were absolutely alienated by Donald Trump and unhappy with everything that happened on January 6th, of course. I don't know that really leaves much of an opening for Mike Pence in 2024. But what is interesting to me is that their schism may have actually pushed Pence into running because, you say there are other people that have to be alienated too.
And you would know this better than me, but my guess would be that Pence might think he has the evangelical vote locked up because of his long career and service on behalf of that movement. But I'm not so sure. like I think he might be a little shocked when he comes to find out which if it were just those two, you know, which candidate evangelicals would go for. You would know that better. Wouldn't they lean more Trump?
Yeah, there's no question, and I don't think actually that Mike Pence.
Which is amazing.
Yeah, it is. But I don't think Mike Pence has any illusions about that. I think Mike Pence and this team very much know that, and that's what's interesting to me about this. It's they're pretty firmly aware. Everybody in the Republican Party is pretty firmly aware that there's this huge chunk of the voters who actually are more loyal to Donald Trump than they are to the Republican Party. I've talked to plenty of people at Trump rallies, everything. If you left the Republican Party, would you vote for Trump or the Republican? The answer is always, always, always Trump, as is to be expected. So thinking that there's a slice of the primary voting base that would go for Mike Pence, I think is strange. And I don't know if this is just something, it's early that they're exploring. I think a lot of people are exploring it and talking about it, and that's the extent of their plans. But it's interesting.
Well, speaking of Republican presidential candidates, Tulsi Gabbard was on Fox News recently.
Yeah.
You know, she has, for a long time, was kind of a kind of contrarian within Democratic circles, but she always had, you know, a foot in the Democratic Party, or she would use lingo, or she would frame her position in left-wing terms, even as that position itself kind of drifted more conservative. Recent appearance on Fox News, when she was asked about the Build Back Better Act, she dropped all the pretense as just pure, uncut, you know, Reaganism. So let's take a look. This is Tulsi Gabbard.
Here's the reality with the bill that they're continuing to push forward is that our government is too powerful and too big even as it is, and this bill is only going to make matters worse. The provisions in the bill are so vague that really it's going to be unelected bureaucrats who end up deciding how these provisions are implemented, and no accountability. And really it'll empower them to be able to stick their noses into every aspect of our lives, furthering this cradle to grave mentality of government dependence that makes us lose even more of our autonomy as we are paying for it. As government gets bigger, our wallets are getting smaller.
Hey, as government's getting bigger, our wallets are getting smaller. Cradle to grave dependency. Listen, I like it. Right? It's what's interesting.
She's talking to you. She's not talking to me anymore.
Well, yeah, she's definitely not talking to you anymore. And that's because, so what's interesting to me about this is that I've been waiting sort of for Democrats to jump on that, because it doesn't sound like uncut Reaganism, as you said, yes, but actually it sounds like the Democratic Party up until very recently. And it sounds like Bill Clinton. It sounds like the way a lot of Democrats would react if you explained, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, what Joe Biden's Build Back Better agenda looks like. That's how a lot of Democrats would have reacted. But with the IRS provision, for instance, what Republicans and Democrats alike have criticized for allowing the IRS to snoop into people's personal bank accounts, all of these things, this bill does have a whole lot of power grabs in it. That is absolutely true. And I've been sort of waiting to see if there would be Democrats, if you can call Tulsi Gabbard, if you can sort of consider her a Democrat to an extent anymore. I've been sort of waiting to see if Democrats would jump on that. Somewhat.
Right. And that's fine. And I think there should be power grabs in it, because it's a power struggle. It's if you're trying to make life more bearable for middle class and working class people, you're going to have to take some resources from society and redirect them towards child care subsidies, towards child care tax credits. If you're going to try to reverse the direction of the fossil fuel industry, that's a power struggle. And you're going to have to grab power from them, and you're going to have to put power into renewable and clean energy. So yeah, I'm fine with that. But so Tulsi has gone through an extraordinary evolution, but I think that she has been looking at this. I don't think this is a kind of a new opportunistic thing. I think she's been moving in this direction for quite some time.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong in the control. Correct me. She voted against impeaching Donald Trump the first time.
Was it the first time or the second time?
She would have been out by the second time,
Okay.
because she didn't run for re-election.
Mhm.
But as I recall, she voted against impeaching Trump, and I think that she has been keeping open alliances with the right in a very
She voted
strategic
president.
way. Did she
Yeah,
vote president?
she
Is
voted
that what it was?
yeah.
I remember that she did something where it's like, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And right, so at that point, so that was what, December or whatever, of 2019.
Mhm.
So it's like she wasn't quite ready. She's still like running for president as a Democrat.
Yeah.
So she's not quite ready to go. So present is an interesting vote there. You know, she has taken this what looks like an anti-war stand, but whenever you listen to her, she's anti-regime change wars.
Mhm.
She always adds regime change wars. Like, that's an interesting qualification. So what wars are you okay with? It turns out she's okay with the entire global war on terror. And this isn't something she's ever hidden before. And so that fits in with the kind of Trump populist base. Toward the end of her time, she started pushing a bunch of anti-abortion stuff. Like
Yes.
her end of time in Congress.
Yes.
So I think you add all this together, and she's looking at either running for president as a Republican in 2024 or appearing on every short list for a Republican presidential candidate. From your perspective, as somebody who's on the right, is she fantasizing, or has she built enough popularity with this element of the Republican base and through Fox News appearances and everything else that a Republican will be like, yeah, let's own the libs by putting a former lib on the ticket who's a veteran and
Yeah. Well, that impulse is very strong, and I think she understands it because Republicans do have this, and conservatives more broadly have this impulse to say anybody who was sort of fashionable on the left, who is now legitimizing us, we must latch onto and welcome with open arms because it does legitimize us and it makes us feel validated, and it gives us some credibility. That said, I don't even know that like Tulsi Gabbard's real appeal is with the Republican base. I think she's like actually genuinely appealing to the alienated center. And whether or not that's correct is a different question. But I think she's saying like, listen, I don't fit neatly into any box. The Democratic Party has changed a lot. Some people say for better, some people say for worse. She says for worse. And there are a lot of people exactly like her who are floating between parties right now who are anti-establishment and have this hodgepodge of views that no longer sort of congeals into an ideology sort of coherently as the establishment wants them to. And so I think it's true. She knows that to be in power going forward, she needs to be on the right and not on the left because any of her heterodox views on cultural issues will immediately disqualify her from any position, anything like that. On the right, no. It'll be quite the opposite. People will welcome her and be happy to have her.
a lot of them are Orthodox views.
Yeah. Right.
Particularly, there's a lot of hostility there. She's always attacking political Islam. Like, you know, she speaks in kind of religious war, type the clash of civilization type terms from like the late 90s, early 2000s in a very kind of odd way, but that fits much better in a Republican primary than a Democratic one.
It's interesting because it fits better there, but like where does it actually fit? Right. I mean, and that's where I think she does. That's where I think she does have a lot of appeal for people who do have this hodgepodge of views. It's not like they're down ticket. You can. It's interesting. I think she's really sort of carving out her niche to represent people that are similarly have been left behind by one party but still don't fit perfectly in another.
Right, ideology's up for grabs
at
this point. It feels like so she can fit wherever.
Yeah, totally agree.
And we will tell you what's on our radars up next.
Thank you all. Thanks so much. Welcome to the freest state in the United States. God bless you guys. We're happy that you're here. I want to thank Senator Simpson for the introduction. He hit a lot of the high points. I mean, we are in a situation where, of course, we protected people's right to work and businesses to operate and kids to go to school. And that's had a huge impact on where we are in the quality of life and our economy. When you look at the fact that, yes, we do have the lowest per capita tax burden in the nation, that's very attractive to a lot of people, but we're able to utilize that in ways that are producing better services and better results for the citizens. I have people move, as you might imagine, there's people that move into Florida from other states and they will compare. So Wilton mentioned the difference between New York. They don't even have the same population. They have 3 million fewer people than Florida now. Their budget's over twice the size, but anyone that moves from there to here will say your infrastructure is so much better, your roads are nicer, your services are better. I can get my driver's license in 2 minutes. It's unbelievable. And our K through 12 system is now ranked number 3 for education achievement in the United States. We're the number 1 state for school choice, but we also have now strong public education. That wasn't necessarily true when I was growing up in Florida. I mean, certainly we would not have been on New York's level or California. Now they've really gone in the other direction, and we're going in a good direction. And so it just shows you that good, sound conservative policies really do make a difference. And what we're seeing particularly since COVID, Florida's always had lower taxes than a lot of these other states, and that has been an attraction for sure. But what we've seen over the last 2 years is much more than just lower taxes. You have people fleeing lockdowns, arbitrary restrictions and mandates. In fact, some of your governors would lock down their people, and then the governors would come to Florida and live normally for this. Didn't necessarily.
Okay. What's up?
Introducing the all-new Ford Maverick, a truck for people who didn't know they needed a truck. A truck with an available standard hybrid engine, built to defy expectations. The all-new Ford Maverick.
Starting Monday, Albertans will need a vaccine record with a QR code to access venues, implementing the restrictions exemption program. The enhanced record is available through alberta.ca/COVID records. If you aren't able to display this on a phone, you can also get a printed vaccine record with a QR code at no cost by visiting a registry agent office or by calling 819. Businesses and operators can use the AV COVID Records Verifier app to confirm a patron's vaccination status. This app can also scan records with QR codes issued by other provinces and territories.
Richard Southern is back from vacation. We're reunited, Richard, after 2 weeks apart. It's great to see you.
I'm so happy. I didn't know what to do with myself last week, and no fun stories to talk about.
I know. So now we have a lot of fun stories, and we're going to start with something to honor your first day back. We're going to start with one of your favorite topics, which is UFOs.
Back in my wheelhouse here, for sure, Erica. This is interesting. More high-profile U.S. Politicians, political leaders, intelligence leaders are now weighing in on this story. Of course, this is the background. These videos shot by U.S. Navy pilots a number of years ago of vehicles. They didn't know what they were. They were moving in ways they couldn't explain. They were authenticated by the Pentagon last year. In June, the Pentagon came out with a big report on this, saying they couldn't explain hundreds of incidents. A couple of weeks ago, the current head of NASA said, oh, it's something. And now, Avril Haines is speaking out. She is the U.S. Director of National Intelligence. She oversees 16 U.S. spy agencies, including the FBI and the CIA. She was asked at an event in Washington the other day what she thought about these videos. Take a look.
The main issues that Congress and others have been concerned about are basically safety of flight concerns and counterintelligence issues. But of course, there's always the question of, is there something else that we simply do not understand that might come extraterrestrial?
Couldn't even get that word out, Erica, but the fact that she did crack open the door, the top U.S. spy team cracked open the door to this possibly being extraterrestrial, that's pretty significant.
Yeah, definitely. Little by little, this is gaining more traction, more interest and attention. That's very interesting. Okay, there's one less place to go this year if you're looking to buy a real Christmas tree.
IKEA. Yes to meatballs, no to Christmas trees this year. At IKEA, Erica, the Swedish furniture giant, says it won't be selling real Christmas trees at its stores. That they actually have been doing that. That was kind of a tradition for IKEA, not doing it this year. They say it's because of an industry-wide shortage of Christmas trees. I remember actually doing the story last November about a Christmas tree shortage. This is persisting this year. It has to do with climate. It's taking longer to grow the trees. This year, though, the global supply chain crunch brought on by the pandemic also affecting the supply of Christmas trees. So you're not going to be able to get your tree at IKEA. You're going to have to shop around for it. You know, you were telling me during the break that you put your Christmas tree up already here.
I did, yeah. It's a fake one. I considered getting a real one, but yeah, I know there's a shortage going on, but I just thought that the upkeep for me, personally, I wouldn't have been able to do it.
I agree. A lot of people on Twitter today, some people on Twitter were saying, you got to wait until the 15th of December. Some people are very adamant that you can't put your tree up this early.
Okay.
But I say, whatever. Put
I
it up.
needed to have the holiday vibes. I needed to feel good, so that's fine. And finally, we all have that one song that we love listening to over and over again. And now there's a new study that shows that what it does to our brain.
When I find a song I like, I listen to it over and over until I hate it. I run it right into the ground, Erica.
Just binge it. Yeah.
What do you have Adele on your
Yeah,
Did you watch her last night?
Of course I did, yeah. And she was so amazing, and the interview was really, really good. And she always has those songs that put you right in the feels.
Totally. Anyways, a new study out of the University of Toronto found listening to your favorite song, be it Adele or otherwise, could be good for your brain. They looked specifically, though, at patients with Alzheimer's and dementia, and it found listening to a song they liked, especially one that had meaning, like a song they listened to on their wedding day or whatever, stimulated neural connectivity and helped maintain higher levels of brain functioning. All participants improved cognitively when they listened to their favorite song or their most meaningful song on repeat. And experts say using music to help treat people in early stages of Alzheimer's and dementia could be a game changer.
I love that. Yeah, and I said listen to all the throwbacks too. Makes me feel good. Brings me back to.
I'm all about the '90s right now. I love that stuff.
We gotta swap playlists.
We should have a dance off on Friday too.
Okay, so on that note, thanks for joining us, Richard. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you, Erica.
So it's something many doctors have been bracing for, knowing the pandemic has caused a fear of emergency rooms and a lack of in-person health care. A pediatric cancer surgeon is speaking out about an alarming trend that she's now seeing in the young patients at her hospital, something she calls a tragic consequence of COVID-19.
One of the most common things I treat is brain tumors that occur in the cerebellum or the back of the brain.
Dr. Sheila Singh is a pediatric neurosurgeon at Hamilton's McMaster Children's Hospital, and what she's now seeing 20 months into the pandemic is nothing short of devastating.
I literally have not seen cancer this widespread or this advanced, and it really is because of the diagnostic delays. So the COVID pandemic restrictions provided just enough time to push a lot of diagnoses into the untreatable or advanced stage.
I mean, you're saying that you're seeing kids at end stage cancer, and then they could have been saved.
Yes, there are patients that have suffered this degree of diagnostic delay.
The oncology board at McMaster normally sees 30 to 60 new diagnoses a year, and according to Dr. Singh, right now almost every case of cancer is further along than it should be. She recalls a bad feeling she had back in the early days of the pandemic when the hospital was a ghost town.
And the irony wasn't lost on me that people were scared to come to the hospital for fear of catching COVID in a healthcare setting, when I had never seen the hospital this clean before in my whole life or this empty. And I think that combination of the fact that parents were scared to come to the hospital and then assumed that virtual visits still constituted a proper doctor's appointment meant that a lot of things went missed and undiagnosed.
Here in Toronto, St. Kitts Hospital has been seeing an increase in visits to the emergency department with concerns that could be addressed by a pediatrician or family physician. The hospital also tells City News that staff are seeing patients who have had limited access to in-person primary care that has contributed